This is the Manufacturing Automation Podcast. I'm Michael.
And I'm Matt. In this podcast, we're going to discuss growing companies, automation and manufacturing,
and how we're building the lives and businesses we want to see in the world. You know, I think that I still have like that desire for, some kind of advice, moving to the next level. But I definitely want to find something almost more curated. And it seems like you've got that, and I'm a little bit jealous.
Yeah, I definitely got lucky there. I don't know how to help you replicate it other than maybe see what other nonprofits are around. I know, I think SCORE is another group that does something similar. That I know that's nationwide. The other one is like your small business development centers. So local universities typically get funding for that. I actually have another two individuals that sit in on that. We're been doing that group at Small Business Development Center at University of Wisconsin. I've been doing that for about 5 years as well. And that's just a little bit different. They get funded by the state, and they work with a lot of other small businesses and see a lot of the common themes. I definitely say it's a completely different mindset and approach to helping, where the board of advisors is aggressive towards hitting the numbers and growth. Small Business Development Center is more human orientated and standard steps, if you will. They kind of have their checklists that they just work through.
Yeah. And I think where I definitely struggle is hitting the numbers, going by the metrics, trying to be an excellent manager. Kind of those are the things where I struggle. I don't so much struggle on like the passion front or the R&D front or even really the product side. It's the discipline of running a business day to day that is, where I'm trying to move towards, excellence for the business as a whole, even if I never get to 100% there.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want insight onto what the typical agenda is for them, they want to always see what the updated P&L is for the business, what the updated balance sheet is for the business, what our current contracts are and status of them. The new one that they're adding is the HubSpot reporting. So now we're starting to do deals and lead reporting, so exporting that so they can see trends and then start advising on some of the sales so we can start forecasting long term. Now that kind of the numbers we're dealing with and so much is getting forecast based, just trying to give advice on, I don't know, those soft numbers, if you will, because there's a lot of big decisions that are getting made that without proper perspective on forecasting, they can be catastrophic. So here's a
question, without that accountability there, would you be disciplined about having, your P&L perfectly prepared, your balance sheet perfectly prepared, going and doing that review once a month? Or are you kind of like me in that you'll get it to good enough to where you feel like you have perspective on the business, but maybe it's not as good as it needs to be?
That's interesting because that also plays back to, for P&L, balance sheet, and contracts, having the line of credit in place that we put in, while we don't have to report to the bank monthly if we're not using it, it just kind of created that cadence where it's like, even if we don't have to do it, why wouldn't I do the P&L? So I've been doing that now for 2.5 years. I've been holding myself accountable to the bank for the P&L and balance sheet and AR. So I guess that's kind of a roundabout yes/no, but because of another accountability point. So I guess I'm probably not really sure if I would hold myself accountable to that. I don't know. I've just found in the past, though, when I didn't look at the numbers, I just found myself in positions that I was not prepared for, or problems that I could have corrected for months in advance, and they would have been a lot less painful.
Yeah, I've been through that enough times that I'm disciplined about it, but I'm definitely I'm the kind of person to work out. I need to have paid a trainer, and for that reason, I think there's an appeal there, and I got to start looking towards another solution.
Yeah. Something else, for discipline, my spouse, Amanda, she's one of those, if you go with the workout or stuff like that, if I set goals and I share them with her, she's like, hey, did you do that? She's such a good accountability coach on those things. So I would say, somebody else in your life that even if they're not a board of advisors or if they're just a friend, I have one of my friends that's, he's growing a construction business. It's him and one other person right now, but we just share general goals of what we're doing. And now we meet once a month for dinner, and we kind of set a couple of accountability metrics there too. So I don't think it's just the board of advisors. I don't think it's just a spouse or significant other. I think there's multiple different points of contact that you can have there for accountability that I've found help me.
And I think, one thing I've been really historically guilty of is just, taking on way too many tasks, way too much responsibility, the kind of the classic not delegating enough. And I have historically, like when we've gone through growth spurts, have gone through kind of waves of delegating too much or delegating without sufficient training, and, overcorrecting the other way.
I think that's very common though, Michael.
It is very common, but it's one of those things as, I grow as someone running a business that, I need to learn to have fewer, more critical accountability items so that it doesn't become this continual sense of overwhelm of, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Because, the reality, especially in a growing business, is there's always fires burning that you just have to let smolder. And, that can be hard.
Yeah. And sometimes just letting fires burn themselves out is the right answer. A lot of people jump too quick, in my opinion. I know that was something I used to do early on, was everything had to be hot if it came up, if somebody was having a problem, and it's like, just step back and watch sometimes. Is this a learning experience for that person? Don't take it away. Is this a big pain or risk for the business? Step in. It's just starting to get that calibration, if you will, to what you need to step in on.
Yeah.
That's why you self-corrected is where I was going with that.
Yeah. Especially with customers. I think that's something I've really taken to heart over the last 6 months, especially as turnkeys have become a bigger and bigger deal for us. Like, a lot of the time maybe we're working on trying to really nail in like our customer compliance of following the process with our turnkeys. But a lot of the time people will jump ahead or they'll do something or they'll get frustrated, and, really just waiting 24 hours sometimes is enough for them to have calmed down enough to where they realized, hey, if I would have just done the training or letting them come to their own conclusions is often easier than just nicely saying, hey, wait until the training here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common old piece of advice. I mean, that was one my dad gave me. I've heard from several other people as well, as if you're going to send an angry email, leave it in your draft box for 24 hours.
Yep.
Because it won't get sent angry then.
Yep, for sure. Well, kind of moving on, how's your week been? I know you were doing all the HubSpot stuff the week prior.
More HubSpot stuff since we wrapped up Pack, and then it's following up from that. So all the leads got imported. I was taking care of a lot of the 5-star lead emails, had another team member on 4-star, and then we also had another trade show this week. So then kind of rinse and repeat there, and still hadn't finished all the follow-ups from Pack. So that'll be probably through the rest of the month here, getting those individualized emails and then like the mass emails sent out this month.
Sweet.
Those 2 trade shows.
And you guys did the proposal and wrapped everything up on that really large potential deal in the pipeline, right?
Correct. We pitched that to the customer. Sounds like we're in the top running for that. They're coming on Friday actually to do a site visit to verify that they're happy with the current builds that we're doing, kind of do an accountability check. I view that as a really strong positive. I'd think we're at 75% of site visits result in a project going to close as of right now. So somebody that's willing to drive several hours just to come look at our facility tends to increase our conversion rate. So
yeah, well,
hopefully that number goes up.
Yeah, you're a serious contender in that case for sure.
Yeah. So that's really optimistic. And then, yeah, it's really just been emails and trade shows. But what about you? You've been having some fun videos online now.
Oh man, yeah. So I've been trying to get back on top of advertising. I mean, we've seen kind of a little bit of top of funnel decrease. So I'm trying to correct that. We did kind of the soft, Instagram, LinkedIn launch of the internal pallet loading system. So, that is looking great. Tons and tons of product interest. I was kind of hoping the Instagram reel would go viral, but we got like 500 likes in like 3 or 4 hours or something. But
that's really good though.
Yeah. But when you hit viral, it's, like almost distribution you can't even pay for, where you'll get 500,000 views or something. And we've hit it 3 or 4 times. So
really?
It didn't convert to viral, and I think it was too long. So I'm going to try to repackage it maybe with some different music in like a 29-second tidbit and just repost the same thing.
That might do it.
But the people seem to love the concept. One big thing we have been pushing for is nailing down distribution. So we're now distributing for Orange Vice and Fifth Axis.
Yeah, I've
And
noticed
then,
a lot of that on
yeah.
Insta.
So, most of that, the Fifth Axis stuff is mostly for the little low profile cleats that, we made our own low profile cleat system, but, by the time we get, distribution discounts, it just makes more sense to buy the little cleats. And we're actually making the clamp module that grabs onto the side to make it low profile enough. And then just a selection of vices really to go on top of those. So the way we're selling it, it's basically, we want to sell you pallets plus vices plus the 0 point and do the install. And then there's, one more in the works. I had a
One
good
more?
chat. Yeah, so we don't really love the Aroa system for this application. Mostly, there's a couple different reasons, but the big one is the pull stud's really long, and there's just not enough grip force. So like the ITS system, it's incredible for small work pieces, but you get a big stack up on a 5-axis machine, and you only have 1,500 pounds of pull force. So we had a real constraint though of what we can really put into the system, because we have a very space constrained area to be able to make the geometry of the internal pallet loader work. So we ended up kind of landing on the Pearson Max 4 system, which I've never really seen in the wild, but it has a flat base and has 15,000 pounds of pull force. So I had a good chat with Jay. Hopefully we'll become, a sort of kind of distributor there. I don't think we'll actually like directly sell the product, but we're going to sell hopefully that as a 0 point with, 9-10 pallets all at once.
Very cool.
So that's been in the works. And the other thing I kind of had with my team was just, I think kind of a discipline and accountability reset. We have been having an issue. I've always been a very flexible boss, but I just started to have the feeling that people were taking a little bit advantage of the level of flexibility. So, we've always had somewhat flexible hours, but people have really been pushing on that over the last couple of weeks.
Can you give an example to that?
Well, so, our official start time has always been at 8. And of course, one thing people don't think about in LA is how brutal the traffic can be. You might be 30 minutes away at one time, and that might turn into 95 minutes at another time of the day. And because of that, the flexibility turned for some of our employees from, I'm going to come in at 7:30 to 7 to 6. And it got to the point where, our staff pushing earlier and our staff pushing later, meant that they were only like here at the same time for like 3 or 4 hours. I had a bit of a reset to pull everyone directionally in the same way to get 6 hours of overlap. Make sure everyone's here and disciplined for the huddle. 1 or 2 people didn't really take me seriously when I said that, so they got written up. and now I think the staff is moving in the right direction and really following the work orders, and we're just getting generally more efficient. And that's one of the things where I've said many times I'm not the perfect manager, and I think honestly, long term I want to go into more the CTO kind of visionary role, but the reality is I have to do it until we're at a level of scale where that makes sense.
You're right. Until it makes sense, then you can step out. But you have to have those accountability meetings. I mean, we kind of have the 6 to like 9:30 is when a lot of people start here, but it also slips too of, is somebody showing up at 8 or 8:10, and then what do they put for their clock time? That's always one where you just have to put a lot of trust in your team members. But
for that, we actually just have a little biometric scanner.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. So we have 2 of them, one in each building, and they're like $25 a month. They're called UAttend, and it's like $200 for the little box, but it just basically makes time theft impossible, which is like kind of the ideal thing.
Yeah, I've put the trust on our team, and that's one of those where if I catch something like that, that's just a non-negotiable. It's not going to be a fun conversation for either of us.
Yep.
Is kind of the way I've always viewed that, and I guess I've been fortunate that I've never had time theft that I'm aware of. So, but it does, micro stealing is a real thing there on 15-minute metrics or 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Those numbers really stack up in a hurry.
Yeah, and it's there's always a balance of we don't need to track every little thing, like have a conversation at the water cooler, like we want a good culture, but also there has to be, a line in the sand somewhere, accountability somewhere, and that line in the sand is, being clocked in when you're not.
Exactly.
So I had a little bit of a reset there. And then the conveyor loading system is, we're getting that one wrapped up, and I've had a real push on the team because we have that, that $2 million project that kind of went, sideways when the customer got into financial trouble. That is finally being wrapped up, 3 years later. And we're taking that as an opportunity. We have one or two small projects they've kind of dragged on because there's no client pressure or no real firm deadline for like a 6-month period.
Wow.
I put a real push just to wrap those up, get them out the
get them
door,
done.
and then just focus solely on automation and our like 2 consulting clients.
Nice. Yeah, that'll be good. But it sounds like we're both having a wrap up at the end of the year here. We've got that one project for the extrusion processing machine. We're finally doing fat, or I shouldn't say finally. Fat's happening on this coming week, or I guess today's Sunday. So this week, which is really exciting because that's been a big engineering and learning challenge for our team. So it's nice to see these projects wrapping up at the end of the year, isn't it?
Yeah. And of course we have the conveyor loading system, Rev 4, finally kind of soft launching.
Okay.
Then we're trying to get some, beta units of the internal pallet loader onto customer machines. Honestly, that's like our easiest to use product like to date because there's just no learning curve. It's like, here's the macros, load your pallets, and it just does its thing. But it's a really busy time, which is why I've been, coming in for extra hours, and now I'm trying to balance not burning out.
Yeah, that's exactly. Don't burn yourself out. And then it's interesting because you have such a product heavy business where this time of the year is so heavy for you to get production out, get stuff to your customers, where right now we're so heavy on the quoting and getting stuff laid out for next year. We're like, historically, December and January are always very slow months for us in terms of client engagement. So it's interesting.
Yeah, January is very slow. And honestly, like, it's not. I think our sales side is really slammed right now. Of doing the follow up, looking at the customers who are trying to get the Section 179 in, and really the question is like, well, we don't know to how many of these, the internal pallet loader or the conveyor loading system, are going to need to be built and on the floor by the 31st. And I don't know what that number is, and that's definitely going to have an influence on just how hectic and difficult, and how much reliance we have on OSPs to deal with an influx, come December. But it could be slammed, it could be relatively smooth sailing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, time will tell.
Yeah. And to be fair, this is our first year-end thing where we have that as a real issue. People in years prior would try to spend down their budget, but buying $10,000-$15,000 of hardware versus buying a $45,000 machine install can be a different calculation.
Yeah, you're getting into CapEx categories there then, where it's not something people can put on a credit card over a couple months or just have the authority with near zero sign off. It's a longer sales cycle. I'll be curious to see how that sales cycle continues to tick up for you as you get into these bigger. It is continuing
to get longer and longer is what we've seen.
Yeah, what are you at right now?
Well, we kind of have different levels of products. The auto tumble baskets, there's really not a sales cycle. You see it, you have a need for it, you buy it. That's, $700. The 1 week. Yeah. The vices, it depends if you're buying 1 or 2 or 8. A lot of the kind of sub $5,000 transactions, honestly, I'm not even sure what the sales cycle is because our system's not built out to like follow the person, and cookies and tracking software has all been kind of constrained in the last year, to where we don't have as good of insight. If someone just purchased it, I don't know how many times they visited the website or been lurking or following us. So I don't really know.
HubSpot, don't you?
Yeah, but they have to fill something out to be a trackable person.
Yeah, that's true. So
if they didn't sign up for the newsletter, then and they just go create an account and buy something, but they've actually been lurking for 6 months. I didn't know that the quote unquote sales cycle was 6 months there.
Yeah, that's true. So to you, it looks like sub 30 days.
Yeah. But what we're seeing, turnkeys, are tending to be in the 2 to 3 month timeline for kind
Yeah.
of a $25,000 to $30,000 turnkey.
That sounds like it makes a lot of sense to me,
Yeah.
considering we're 6 months to 2 years. So yeah, 2 to 3 months seems to make a lot of sense for that CapEx.
Yeah. Conveyors are looking at they're in the 2 to 8 month mark. And we don't know what the internal pallet loading system is going to be. We just kind of have, really earmarked what the pricing is going to be, which is, essentially 20 grand for the kind of base system with the shelving and the actual unit, the programming and everything. Then you're adding 9 vices, 9 pallets, and so on. So, installed, everything said and done, it's probably $30,000 to $35,000.
Yeah, I think you're probably looking at 3 to 12 months. I mean, it's going to be like
I don't know if that's true on the pallet loader.
yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll see.
Yeah, that's fair, and that's one of the things too with the we saw with the 2-op automation pallet. Especially when we were pushing the marketing really hard on the unit and the turnkeys, is because it was just so novel. We had a large influx of kind of those early adopter customers, and then we sold a ton of them, and then there was kind of a pullback to I think a baseline sales cycle, and I think we'll probably see the same thing with the internal pallet loader.
Look forward to hearing about that in a couple months here.
Yeah, and the thing with the pallet loader, and part of the reason I'm so excited about it, is there's just not any competing system. Like, you're not gonna get something that can transfer 9 pallets with the vices, the work holding, the macro programming for 35 grand. Like, you're just not. Like the Aroa software is $20,000 now.
Do you think you're going to be falling into the same issue you had on previous products, where you're just coming in so low compared to the market that there might be a challenge?
The reason I don't think it's an issue, so like with grippers, part of the problem is how do you price them kind of commensurate with their value? Because people kind of can look at it and say, well, I could make that if I put the time in. So you need to have them priced to a level where it makes sense and it can be a no-brainer, right? But and really where we found we could deliver the value there is the software and the templates and the turnkeys, which is where it's hard and part of the reason there's so little gripper adoption. I think the reason that we're not going to run into that issue is that people can kind of look at it and see why it's so much less expensive, right? Like the head in the mill is doing the loading, right?
Yeah,
so
it's a completely different
perspective
to take on pallet loading.
So, for that reason, I think people look at the numbers and just say, hey, what I'm actually buying is 9 orange vices, 9 pallets, a Pearson system, this shelf, the engineering, the software, and you look at that and, we're coming in at, not super far off just the work holding you'd put into a 9 or 10 pallet Trinity system.
Mm-hmm. 1 second. I'm going to close the door to my office because the heater outside's kicking in and it's very loud. So 1 second.
Is it cold over there? Whew.
I also took the opportunity to grab a Red Bull because I could smell yours from here. And we recently started stocking those again over the last
really?
like 30 days. I don't know what it is, but like the scent of a Red Bull is like so addicting to me. Like if somebody has one of those in the room, it's like, oh my gosh, it's such a unique scent.
It's kind of like wine that way. And that like if you stop drinking it for long enough, like the smell is like super off-putting. The taste isn't good. But if you drink enough like red wine, you start to be like, oh my God, that smells awesome. Mm-hmm. Red Bull is an acquired taste.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. So
sorry, what were we talking? The internal pallet loader.
Just the cost of it is where you're kind of at.
Yeah, and that the thing about it too is because the cost is so low, and because it's really critical for us to do the install. One of the things that we're really, kind of forcing our customers to do to make the margin structure make sense is to buy the package, including, all 9 of the pallets, all 9 of the vices, to where, we actually are making a sufficiently good margin structure to justify, hey, we're going to fly out to your location and put this on your machine.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question. Since you applied for a patent on that, it's very specific to Haas at this point. Would you just sell that IP if the opportunity came knocking from from Haas, if you will?
Yeah, I would say that I wouldn't agree that it's specific to Haas. It's specific to the kinematics of a XYZ moving head 5-axis machine.
Okay.
And that's also true for the conveyor. And I think the reality, the conveyor's patent pending at this point as well. The reality is that we don't really have the scale at a couple $1 million a year company to fight like a true patent war with a large company.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they'll bury you. Who can bleed more is the battle there.
Mm-hmm. So we had a lot of internal debate about when to start talking about it. And in the US, you can go and market your product for a year, then do a provisional. As long as you have the first priority date on the first provisional, you're fine. Really, I think what kind of changed my perspective and pushed me to launch it a little bit earlier than I probably otherwise would have is, number one, we want to drum up interest to try to close out the year strong. But
oh yeah, there's always a reason to wait, and
yeah,
in my opinion, I think you made the right decision before I even hear the rest of the story because you decided to play aggressive, and I like that.
Yeah, but I was actually playing pretty conservatively, and one thing Gary, our VP of sales, said to me is like, look, Michael, there's going to be 10 more internal pallet loaders. First there was the gripper, then there was a 2-op pallet system, then there was a conveyor system. Like there's going to be more of these, because we were talking about, like at the end of the day, this is so simple that, if we succeed, it will become, in my opinion, potentially destructive to the industry. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like, every time hardware or hard drives have become more and more successful, or, data could become, an order of magnitude more data could go on a hard drive. It actually shrunk the market because all of a sudden these companies selling, 2 gigabyte hard drives for $2 million to these big enterprises. Now that 2 gigabytes could be sold for $100,000 and the overall market share size went down. So, I think that's kind of inevitable, like the movement towards lower cost automation with enough time.
Oh, you've seen it in the 3D printing market. We've seen it
in the robot market already as a start.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And, in my opinion, it's something that I think the good news is a company like Haas or DN or the people who really have the manpower to go after something like this are going to view it as kind of cannibalistic to the market, which will buy us time. But yeah, I think the reality is that it's going to get copied and that we may potentially be forced into selling that IP, even if we don't want to.
Yeah,
so it's like, we can live with it.
Yeah, time will tell. I feel like that's my line of this show is we'll see how it plays out. It's so easy to be speculative or forecast the future, and all we can do is worry about our decisions today and move forward.
Yeah, and like there's the very close industry analog like VersaBuilt. I don't know what the details were, but they licensed their like jaw-changing technology to Gossaker, who owns automation within Reach. I know as part of that transaction, or at least word on the street, is that Gossaker acquired a portion of them in so doing. So the reality is that you kind of have to be flexible with these kind of things where if you succeed to the point where you become in the big players' radar, then that's the time to worry about it.
Yeah, it's almost a fear and an excitement level with both those, that it's like if that comes playing, you just don't want to be forced into something that you don't want to do is probably the big thing.
Yeah, and from my perspective, that's why we patent things. It's not to go after the little guy who tries to build one on his own. I've seen multiple different one guy in a shop copycats of things we've done, and we don't care. The things that we care about are, and the reason we patent these things is, I don't want to see one of these big companies just build a identical conveyor loading system and then outmarket us and outmuscle us.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, that's And then, we're trying to wrap up the conveyor, Rev 4, get the kind of first beta units out there. So it's been really busy in the product development side. And candidly, I think that's why I think we've talked a lot about me playing whack-a-mole within the business. And I think between my focus going kind of all in into the new PLC system and developing an HMI and doing these two kind of product wrap-ups at the same time, I haven't been, as disciplined as just an overall manager in the last month and a half.
Is your goal kind of as December comes in or the end of this month, since you know that it's a big push for the kind of that end of year spending, is your goal to really step back from the R&D or new product for a little bit here so the team gets the proper attention to execute accordingly?
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of these things have gone through so many revs. But I've been trying to balance it, but I've kind of, I think, been guilty of prioritizing the things that I want to do over necessarily should be doing. So that should be my goal.
Yeah. All right. Trying to think, I guess we've got another 20 minutes left. Do you have any big goals for the week, since we're kind of on that realm of your goal for the rest of the year? Do you have any things you're really wanting to tick off next week?
Yeah. So, next week, so I am going to probably work another 3-4 hours today. I want to make some decent progress on the CLS HMI. I kind of let the Sunday be the fun day where I just work on whatever I want, kind of, interruption free, which has made it easier for me to be disciplined about being a good manager, keeping a consistent flow of work orders, holding people accountable kind of on the day to day. But, barring Sunday or today, I think probably the goal for me is to make sure these two projects get out the door. This kind of legacy project has some final, machine plates that need to get wrapped up. And then we have another system that's this kind of, turnkey that's spiraled out of control that we put a new modern HMI on that just needs to get wrapped up.
Okay.
So I want to see those both out the door at the end of the week.
Those seem like two big enough goals that you don't need anything else on your list.
Yeah. Yep. And it's the balance as well of, one of the kind of problems I think that you're, in a sense are lucky to not suffer with is that I think my team can kind of view me as, having the superpower of able to kind of power through something technical. And I can be an emergency Band-Aid. And,
okay.
That's something I'm trying to make sure is more proactive. And that's part of the, the Sunday switch. But, on that project, like this turnkey cleaning project, me redoing the HMI, that's a Michael thing. And, ultimately they really shouldn't be. And part of the reason I'm okay with it is because I can take that exact same HMI with some tweaks and slap it onto the conveyor loading system. But, in the long term, that's not a good use of my resource.
Yeah, I'm lucky to be dumb. No, yeah, it's having stepped back from technical stuff. My weird humor towards myself, but being able to step out of the technical, it's having people that are just so much better than me or the way I ever was in engineering. It's really liberating to have that team.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
You definitely have that in a lot of realms, though, too, Michael. From what I've heard, I think it's one of those where you still struggle to step out, even though there's probably somebody on the team that could, 80% done by somebody else, that Dan Martell line. I think there's somebody on your team that could probably still do it for you. You just need to trust.
Yeah. And I think a lot of how we ended up here is just the tumultuousness of the year, right? This big client kind of going sideways and, trying to renegotiate their contract halfway through. That led us to take on projects I wouldn't have otherwise taken on, that were definitely, good for cash flow, but I think not good for achieving the business goals. I think that was kind of problem number one. We introduced a consulting client that I would have preferred not to reintroduce. That happened. And it became a balancing act of maintaining profitability and cash flow and, focusing on growing the automation business, which has become a very difficult tightrope act.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme though with small businesses is we don't have the work that we want and this opportunity is here, I have to make the decision to take that revenue so I can play to fight another day, if you will.
Yeah.
I think that's a common thing that a lot of business owners struggle with. And it's a decision that has to be made that at the time that those opportunities prevail.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me, one thing that has happened, I don't know, 6 or 7 times is people, of various means, both in and out of industry saying, hey, can we invest in gimbal automation? And the answer has historically always been no. I'm meeting with someone else in the industry who has about a 200-person company who has, kind of repeated that same line. And unlike previous times, the answer wasn't an immediate no. It was, how much faster could we potentially scale, into the next stage of the business? How fast could we offload the consulting clients? How much more aggressively could we advertise if we could afford to, be bleeding $20,000-$30,000 a month? So that is something that I've kind of reintroduced as an option.
You're saying taking outside capital?
Yeah. But the question is, I've already kind of decided, hey, I don't want to take kind of VC aggressive capital. If we did it, it'd have to be someone who is kind of the right industry partner with some level of distribution. And, this particular group kind of lines up. And it was kind of an inbound, which was surprising, actually from an IMTS lead.
Okay.
So, it's kind of like, okay, this is something we'll seriously contemplate, and start with a conversation, see where it goes.
Yeah, I think laying out your expectations really early on those things will be really good. Not trying to dance too much, if you will, because having looked at acquiring businesses like from the other side of the table, I spent way too much time doing due diligence or trying to understand how it would fit the business or negotiate deals when the deals were never going to go through because of misalignment. So getting to that, making sure that just from a value and a human standpoint, you're going to be able to get that deal to work. I think that's where I would start on a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think I'm already kind of aware of what the constraints are.
Okay. But are they aware of that as well?
No,
That?
And that's the thing is I'm not going into it expecting anything to happen. First off, knowing that the business can and will continue operating fine without any outside capital. But kind of where I am, like the first thing I have to recognize is I have to get kind of an unreasonable multiple for me to be happy. That really anything less than like $1 million isn't particularly worthwhile because I can, sell the airplane or do, I can find $250,000 if I really need to. And I guess the biggest thing is, that the valuation being at an unreasonable multiple has to be, the person has to understand and believe in our product pipeline and the things that we'll come up with, and really believe that we're going to grow into a much bigger company and that capital can accelerate that growth.
Yeah, I think that it helps that you're in California there. If you try and ask for an unrealistic multiple in Wisconsin, you probably just get laughed out of the room, where it's standard EBITDA multiples is what everybody lives by over here. Very conservative market. So
yeah. It's definitely easier in a product business than a service business too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Even if the service business is perfectly run, perfect discipline, growing incredibly fast, it's just really hard to raise money for a service business.
It's not sexy. It's not a SaaS business. It's not an AI business. That's where people are putting a lot of the money historically over the years. We'll see as the economic shift. I still am a huge fan of hardware-based products like what Gimbal builds. So,
yeah, it would be so much easier if we like software. Have you ever thought about that, man? If I just loved to code, which I hate.
Yeah, I'd rather smash my head against this brick wall.
I'm with you there.
Than try and program. I've done some programming in the past. It's not me. Have some really talented programmers on our team, thankfully, because they handle all of that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's in the back of my head. I haven't really done any prep work for this meeting. I just am gonna see where it goes.
Yeah, I think that's a good first date, if you will.
Yeah.
Don't stalk them too much.
Yeah, wasn't the plan. But yeah, I'm excited for the premise of doing it, but it's also a matter of the stars kind of have to align. And one thing I've always been good at is making people believe in me. And you know, that is really the threshold of, you have to believe in my unreasonable goals and expectations and buy into them for that relationship to work.
Yeah, I think that there's always some unrealistic or bit of irrationality for people like ourselves. We have to convince ourselves that this is possible. So if we can't convince ourselves, how are we going to convince other people?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, the problem is I'm too easily convinced,
Oh,
which is
really?
why I'm too overly optimistic, I think,
Oh,
in my ability to develop a new product and my ability to get market penetration and so on. But at least the places I think that are causing issues for us are just capital and marketing constraints. But you can only with those constraints removed would I find out if I were right. So we'll see.
or time. Time also removes that.
Well, time is just in direct conflict with the other two, right? Like, with time,
Yeah.
you'll naturally scale. You can naturally grow. And I guess really those constraints are imposing what timeline you achieve the things you want to achieve.
Exactly. Yeah.
But, time can bite you in the other direction too, where if you don't move fast enough, and someone else comes out with some, great automation solution, then you can end up in decline without having had, your say in the situation.
Yeah, I don't know how that'll play in our market. Traditionally, automation's always moved so slow. I mean, a lot of machines are still using technology from like the 80s and 90s. So I don't know. It's definitely accelerating. I don't know if 1 to 2 years is going to be a make or break delta, if you will.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not talking about necessarily 1 to 2 years, but I guess where you can get into trouble is when you're competing with less resources, that you don't have the ability to maybe dial in a system in the same amount of time. So where you have to have an advantage is just being the first mover, in that you're the first person working on problem XYZ.
Yeah, sometimes I see where you're looking at that though. Just by having more resources doesn't necessarily mean that
Well,
they're
yeah,
going to do
that's
it more
very true.
efficiently in a different timeline. You might actually, because you have the resource constraint,
Come up with the clever ideas like a conveyor that aren't just slapping on a robot.
exactly.
Yeah,
I think
that's
that
very true.
you have different strengths to leverage at that point as a smaller business. And I'd focus on those rather than worrying about the muscle, if you will, of dollars.
Yeah, and you just look at Haas and look. I love Haas. We're a Haas shop. I think they're great value. Even if they're 5 to 7 year machines now. I don't necessarily love all the Chinese rebranding they're doing, but that's neither here nor there. But
Yeah.
man, they have struggled for the last 10 years to develop a halfway decent automation system. And even then, the only really good system they came up with is slapping a Hans robot on there with some Haas rebrand and integrating it with their control.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch how that brand goes through, because they've hit such market penetration and now they're trying to continue to scale and grow into other verticals or areas. I think there's going to be some really good white papers in that business in the next 10 years, because there's a lot of other businesses that have followed that same growth trajectory. It's very common thread to follow. So it'll be interesting to watch it play out.
Yeah, and I've heard the two theories of, they're going to destroy their brand image, number one, or number two, like, it's Haas in a box, and it's just the Amazonification of the machine tool industry. And I don't know which one of those, if not both, are going to be correct.
Yeah, I'd be simply guessing at this point. I like to some of my favorite historical white papers are like, if you read about Lego or Porsche, how they lose focus on the brand and then spread too far out. And then what happens is there's a contraction period where they get back to the core. Lego was the brick, so get back to the brick, if you will, and focusing on that brand image and how they can be profitable within that. So maybe it'll be, how do we get back to the VF2, if you will, and really optimize that. I don't know. That's a really interesting one, because it's a completely different level of SKUs that they're managing.
My intuition, and I obviously am operating at such a smaller scale than Haas, but my intuition going through their IMTS booth is just, this is strange. Like, there's all these machines that seem like these bizarro specialty machines. Multi-axis heads that are huge, but they're built on, the frame of a VF6. The kinematics don't really look like they make sense. The price point, it's a $400,000 machine. And then right next to it is a rebranded Chinese bandsaw. And I think about that and I'm just like, what is Haas doing? Like they make the premier 3-axis machines, now entry-level 5-axis machines. But I think, even as a Haas shop, like the minute that you tell me like you need to buy a vertical 5-axis machining center to make precision molds, there's no way I'm going to buy a $350,000 Haas, right? It's just, it just feels like they're going over, into markets that just don't exist, or that they're not hitting the constraints to have a compelling sales platform for.
It looks like they're trying to be everything branded Haas in a shop. I mean, I didn't even know they came out with a bandsaw. I mean, that's
a bandsaw, multiple CMMs, an air compressor, like
CMM,
like 5 or 3 different types of CMMs.
I had no idea that came out.
But they're all like rebranded Chinese, and it's a lot of strange decisions.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to play out, because that is par for the course for what Lego did historically twice, and several other brands where they just got so far outside their core. I don't know.
Yeah,
but he's got enough money to burn to have an F1 team too on the side.
Sure,
so,
yeah, that's very true.
This is a different dynamic.
And there's just a huge question mark of like, what is the next generation of Haas going to look like? Once Gene kind of hands it off, who is it going to be handed off to? What's it going to look like? I mean, that's a whole question. Is this just we're trying to squeeze as much cash as we can to pour it into the F1 team, or there's all kinds of questions about the motivation and why they're doing what they're doing. But they're all against my business intuitions, which is what is interesting.
What do you mean by that? They're all against your business intuitions.
I think Haas tooling is relatively a genius move, but I think something like rebranding a Chinese CMM is a terrible decision. And I guess
that one caught me off guard. That and bandsaw were like, what?
The bandsaw, there's like a $25,000 Bridgeport, which is like it's a Chinese mill that I'm sure you can buy for 10-15 grand from Grizzly. Those things plus the really high end like upmarket experimental machines are more what I mean of like, what is this doing? Like what are we achieving here? My concern, if it were my business there, is like, hey, is this cheapening our brand image? Should we really just focus on being great at one thing rather than selling everything? I think like the core of Haas tooling is genius. And I think their core brand of the Haas machines is excellent. But yeah, there's this whole, place where it looks like just capital is being set on fire. and they have the money to do it.
And that might be what they're doing, is scattering, if you will, a bunch of test cases, and then they'll intentionally cut 80% of those over the next couple of years and hone in the 20% that were winners. I don't know.
Yeah.
That could be figure out what the people are buying on the Chinese brand stuff, and then go back to what they originally do, design it, build it, make certain parts in the US, source it, assemble it in California.
Yeah. And I don't know what the answer is there, but that, definitely the stuff that's not even, designed here, that's just rebranded, is probably what caught me off guard the most. But, at the same time, we bought a DC-1, which is a rebranded Chinese machine, and we like it.
Okay.
So that's how, I guess maybe I could be wrong here and that they're just, playing 4D chess. But anyways, that's enough Haas talk.
Yeah, I agree. What else can we move on to? We covered the next week. I guess the weekend's already over, so maybe we cover what we're going to do with the last kind of 8 hours here, if you will, and what we already did this weekend.
Cool. Yeah, so, my weekend kind of starts on Friday now. We did an escape room.
Okay, yeah, you talked about going on one. Was it challenging, like your goal?
I wouldn't say it was challenging, but it was the first like good one where I'm like, that was a solid thumbs up. We're very discerning with escape rooms now, or we kind of are looking for a certain level to be happy. So we're probably not like the ideal customer because we're just like, we've seen all the tricks before. But when it's really well executed, we can be like, okay, that was really good. And that's
Yeah.
what, so kind of I had that craving filled with that escape room.
Nice.
And then, kind of a lazy day yesterday. I went into work for 4 hours, so I don't know if I can say that, but, I have the little like wood shop, prototyping shop area that I really just tried to clean up and get organized so it's actually usable. And then we went to go see this movie, Anora, which it wasn't great. And then the audio went out probably 40 minutes in. So we got the tickets refunded and I called it a win.
Okay. Oh, that is a solid win. If it wasn't heading in the right direction and then audio goes out and you get a refund.
There was just a lot of screaming in the movie. It's just
Okay.
like, I wanted a relaxing movie night, not a.
I can't remember the last time I went to the movie theater.
That's a lot of people kind of post COVID.
It was even like prior to COVID. Like, I bet it's before like 2016 would be my guess. When Amanda and I built our house, I bet that was kind of the catalyst for us.
Yeah. It's just like a way to get out, more than anything. It's so easy
Makes
just to stream a movie now, but
it's too easy. Yeah. You can lose way too much time to a TV if you wanted to these days.
Mm-hmm. What'd you do this weekend?
Saturday was kind of the rinse and repeat. Went to breakfast with my dad. Went out to the farm since next weekend's deer hunting, or next week, if you will. Really sighted in guns, checked tree stands, invited all the cousins and friends out that do hunt to do the same. So ideally nobody gets hurt going out to their tree stand opening day. That's always a fear of mine. We build a lot of tree stands, so there's always that risk of somebody getting hurt. So I was motivate them with roasted or smoked pork butt and having them all come out for a good amount of food and setting out the rifle target and all the equipment so they could go check stands. It was Saturday or
Sounds
yesterday.
like a lot of work.
I guess I had already done my tree stand the weekend prior, so I more or less was just helping people and just bullshitting all day. So it was a very nice, relaxing day for me.
Yeah.
And then today was getting up somewhat early, started working on the forecasting stuff for the advisor group, getting those meeting notes all ready. And then having this with you, and the rest of the day I'll probably be washing some cars and spending time with Amanda. That's my goal.
Yeah. You got to pay someone to wash your cars. That's one of those Dan Carlin ones where it's so easy to pay someone to buy back a couple hours.
It's one of those where I enjoy doing it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's I actually wish I had time to detail them properly. Like I used to really nerd out hard about auto detailing. Like I have more gear than I'd probably like to admit. So it's one of those where it's actually really relaxing for me to wash cars and mow lawn are like two of those things that, a lot of people are like, get rid of that, Matt. And it's like, I oddly enough enjoy these two things.
I actually really enjoy the car washing thing too. But the issue is that, I'll get busy or I'm, doing something on the weekend and then, my car goes unwashed for a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of the accountability. I will at least get one vehicle washed a weekend, and Amanda will be like, hey, did you wash my vehicle? And that's kind of how that happens. Cause I like seeing a clean vehicle.
You want to wash your car.
Want to what?
Wash your car, not hers.
Yeah.
Just kind of rinse it off.
Yeah, I'll rinse it both. I had so when I worked at Ring Brothers in the automotive industry, my boss there had a line that dirty car, dirty crotch was always his line, that when somebody would bring in a car for work and they wouldn't have it clean, that would just be his line that he'd just say over and over. It's like, good grief, Mike. So that's always kind of another motivator to keep my vehicles clean. It's like, it's a perspective people can have on you too.
I guess, yeah. Cool. Should we wrap there?
Sure. Sounds good to me.
Thank you so much for listening to Matt and I's conversation this week on the Manufacturing Automation Podcast. If you like the podcast, please share it with a friend or give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We'll be back next week to continue sharing our respective journeys in life, business, and industrial automation. Thanks so much.